Is Lewis Hamilton a spent force in Formula One? A truly divisive and emotive subject in the sport right now, but today we're going to debate this topic and hopefully bring you an answer. Hello everybody and welcome back to Formula One Grid Talk. This is episode 201. My name is Tom Horrox and today on F1 Firesides, debating Sir Lewis Hamilton's season, we have Jawad Yaqub from Hit the Apex.
Hello everybody.
And Tom Downey from Everything F1.
Hello all.
If you're enjoying these episodes, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify, as this really helps us climb the rankings, and we will attempt to give you a shout out on the next show if you leave us a good enough review. As well as these fireside chats, we do live previews and reviews of every race weekend, which are on YouTube and on all major audio platforms too. Just search for F1 Chronicle or go to f1chronicle.com to find out more. Make sure you subscribe and click the bell on YouTube so you know when we are live, so you can join in with the chat as and when it happens. So the subject of today is Lewis Hamilton. After Monaco, he lies 6th in the standings with just 50 points, 34 behind his teammate George Russell and only 2 points clear of Lando Norris. Definitely a bit of a surprise to some. So, guys, initial thoughts without giving away anything. How would you rate Lewis Hamilton's season so far out of 10? And what would you say has been his best and worst moments so far?
I'd say Hamilton is on a 5 out of 10 this season. Mm-hmm. His best moment was his result in Spain. I'd say his worst moment was going out in Q1 in Saudi.
Yeah, that's definitely stands out, as I'm sure we'll get into. Jawad, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm probably going to give a 5 or 6 out of 10 as well. For me, his worst moment this season so far was the entire Imola weekend. It was pretty much, it started nowhere, went nowhere. And then just all the news and stuff around it as well about Mercedes and their issues this season. And then for me, the best moment was also Spain, where he came back from that first lap incident and ended up finishing with the race pace similar to the leaders. So that was probably the highlight so far of his season of mine.
Yeah, I can't really debate any of those points. Definitely, it's been one of those seasons, certainly to forget in some sections, and just kind of seems to be riddled with bad luck and excuses at the moment. But certainly what looked like it would have been on paper as the best result of the season for him was the Bahrain weekend, race 1, where he qualified 5th and in the race finished 3rd. 15 points from the race. Good start to the season in hindsight, or was it lucky for the Red Bull failures? What's your thoughts, guys?
I think that definitely had an element to play because, I mean, yeah, he had a decent quali, and the Bahrain track seemed to somewhat suit his Mercedes to a point, or maybe it's just because the other teams hadn't made as many advancements with their car development. But like you said, Tom, he had a good qualifying session. Well, it goes to show where Hamilton and Mercedes are, that we're talking about 5th being a good qualifying session. But that was a podium by chance more than by overtake. But also in F1, you dealt the hands you're given. He was still somewhat up there. But I think if both the balls would have finished, and I think if their engines wouldn't have given up, he'd have been probably 25 seconds behind them, I'd say, if not more.
Yeah, I can't really disagree with that. I think at that point the Mercedes was clearly the 3rd fastest car, so 5th place was pretty much a pole position for Lewis Hamilton for where he is, in the same way that, say, like 17th would be a pole position for Mick Schumacher, for example. So, but yeah, Jawad, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, it was pretty much flattered by lack of performance from others that weekend. George, of course, first weekend for him in the car, in a race weekend in that particular car. So, he's probably just getting used to the systems and whatnot as well. And we've seen him later on in the season comprehensive in qualifying. And then, the Red Bull DNFs, who would have scripted that for the first race towards the end of the race too. So 5th would have been the best that Lewis would have done in that race if it wasn't for those DNFs. I also feel like, if we had McLaren on form in that race as well, or Lando Norris in particular, he could have been up there or thereabouts, similar to where Hamilton and Mercedes are. But, like you said, you get dealt the hand or whatever. So yeah, he lucked into that result, and that's all we can say about Bahrain.
Well, yeah, he certainly seemed to have the measure of his new teammate George Russell in that race, with George Russell only qualifying back in ninth, but then in the race finishing just behind Hamilton. So certainly some signs of promise for George there, but certainly what seemed to be, that hasn't happened very often this season, Lewis Hamilton finishing ahead of George Russell. And that was certainly the case in Saudi Arabia when Hamilton was out in Q1. His only reprise was that he started 15th instead of his lowly 16th qualifying position, but recovering to 10th place, never in clear air. Was that justification for his bad race position, or was it just a terrible race?
Well, he did have a great stint on the hard tyre, 41 laps he did, and it would have looked like a top 7 finish potentially behind George, albeit, but if it wasn't for the pit entry closing, he seems to have this thing where he always falls either side of the pit entry closing and whatnot, like we saw Monza a few years ago. So falling afoul of that, Daniel Ricciardo, I think, brought that one out. If it wasn't for that, then that strategy would have paid off and he would have finished, easily in the top 7 behind Russell. So, bad luck, as it were, comes back into play. But then he gave himself all the work to do with that poor qualifying performance as well on the Sunday.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't for one second think that he wasn't aware that 10th place paid out 1 point, but that radio message at the end quite pointed. Do you even get a point for that? Potentially aim towards the team. I mean, at this point, we don't know what his mindset's like after qualifying so low, and then coming back in the race to a degree, but missing out on with that, just trying to get that rub of the green, that little bit of luck to get that safety car at the right time. But they certainly haven't favoured him, certainly in the last year, have they, Tom?
No, Hamilton for a while has had, does seem to have had some elements of luck in his career, but you could also argue that you make your own luck. And sometimes you get the luck, sometimes the luck goes against you. Just ask Charles Leclerc in Monaco. That seems to always go against him at the minute, bless him. Yeah, he's if we think about his whole, does 10th place gets you a point? He obviously knows the answer to that. He's not stupid, Hamilton. He's a bright individual. You can tell by the way he talks. It's probably more a case that he was frustrated at the situation, that he's gone from being so long at the top, because Mercedes from 2013, they started challenging Red Bull, and then midway through the season, they put all their focus on 2014. To go from there and, from so many titles and race wins and all the records he's set and broken and all the rest of it over the last 7-8 years, to have a new regulation change, and after what he went through last year with that, with that no holds barred fight with Verstappen for the title, to go from that to sort of coming crashing down to earth, being like, oh, hang on a minute, we're not at the top anymore, and all of a sudden you're not hearing his name much on TV anymore, you're not seeing Toto Wolff interviewed as much anymore. It's been a bit of a sort of come down to earth for a bang for Hamilton, I think, because he's been riding this wave of incredible results. Don't get me wrong, I'm not taking anything away from that. But I think he was more annoyed at the team. But also, it's not the team's fault that he can't get a handle on the car, because George Russell's got the same machinery. And Russell is the only driver to finish in the top 5 in every single race. So,
yeah, I mean, certainly the numbers don't lie in that sense. And although there is, as I'm sure we'll get to with the races later on, an element of fortune to that in some cases, he's definitely, so Monaco, for example, was an absolutely phenomenal weekend for George. So it's interesting. You think, do you feel then, Tom, there's a bit of a hangover potentially from that fight from last year that, we often see, certainly in football, when you see teams that just missed out on promotion end up having issues the following season? And do you think that's a similar thing with Hamilton this year?
I don't think that's the only thing, but I think we saw how defeated Hamilton was last year, and people listening to this will know I'm a Max fan, obviously, but for Hamilton to lose the title in the way that he did last year on the last lap of the last race after he'd done such a fight back, I don't want to go over all ground because it's been 6-7 months now, 5-6, whatever, it's been half a year. He looked utterly defeated last year, and I'm not trying to make a really larky attempt at a pun there, but he looked just drained and he sounded sort of defeated. The last time I saw him anywhere like that was when Rosberg retired or beat him in 2016. And Hamilton then obviously bounced back. He had Bottas and all the rest of it for a number of years. I do wonder if there is an element of a hangover, or sort of like tiredness, or sort of what he went through last season. And he's been in the sport for so long. I wonder if perhaps last season he knew that was his last chance to get that 8th title, and set all the beat the one record which has yet to be beaten, because obviously he's equal to Schumacher, but he hasn't beaten him for titles. That's the only thing. And then maybe he was thinking, if I wouldn't have gone in the gravel in 07, or if my engine wouldn't have gone bang in Malaysia in 2016, lots of what ifs. What if he got another title in, say, 2012 with McLaren, when he had a good season, but his car was naff, or the reliability, was naff. So I wonder if there were lots of things going through his mind, and he's got so many off-track activities now. He's a very prominent figure for areas of diversity and inclusion, and he's working with Mercedes and Petronas and a lot of other sponsors and companies and all the rest of it. I wonder if his mind is beginning to go elsewhere, because he's not young. Well, he is, but he's not young in an F1 driver sense. It's like the F1 grid is turning into kindergarten now. And Hamilton is, he's going to have a DBS check soon to be on the grid. For any of our non-UK listeners, a DBS check is a background check to make sure that you're allowed to work with children. That was a UK joke. So maybe there is an element of that. I don't know. It's hard to say what's going on inside his head, and when he pulls that visor down, anything could happen.
Yeah, I think he was expecting bigger things this season. All the talk throughout the season was how Red Bull were overspending, and that they weren't going to have a car for next season because they were focusing too much on 2021. And then when they rock up with this zero pod concept, and everyone's saying Hamilton's going to cruise to an 8th title, and then in reality, they're at best the 3rd best car, and sometimes worse than that. I think that's, especially as you say, with the way his head dropped at the end of the season, that's enough to knock the stuffing out of anyone. I don't care who you are. Whereas George Russell, coming from a team where scoring points is like a victory, and then coming into the season in a more competitive car, despite it being a difficult car to drive, he's obviously going to be on the ascendancy. Moving on to the Australian Grand Prix, he seemed to have a bit of a reprieve here, and qualified 5th, finished 4th. Again, unlucky with a safety car, but how close was he in reality to the limit of the car? And was this kind of a start of a change for him, or was it just very much more of the same?
Well, I was able to see how the cars were behaving firsthand that weekend, and I've never seen Hamilton struggle as much as I did on that particular weekend, particularly with the porpoising, just not being able to cruise through the corners as smoothly as he has been able to in the past. It was a bit of a shock, when coming into qualifying, you hear the records and realise that the last 8 pole positions before this year were in Hamilton's favour, not that he was able to convert all of them into wins. I think he only had 1 win in that time for Mercedes back in 2015. But yeah, it was a stark contrast indeed, but still one of his better results this season. This was the time I think we heard him on the radio rather frustrated with his teammate as well about the safety car and is George ahead and all that. And then, of course, George goes on to finish on the podium for the first time for Mercedes as well in that race. So, elements of frustration there, but overall a good weekend when you look at the expectations of Mercedes that we've kind of had to temper for this season. But yeah, again, he'll be feeling all those things like we were talking about earlier. And then to have another safety car situation kind of for him to fall on the wrong side of that, it just adds fuel to that fire. I know in my head I'd be, letting these things build up and be like, the world's against me kind of thing. He would see that in that respect and get a bit agitated. It was also the first weekend as well that this whole jewelry ban and the thing about underwear and all that got brought up by the stewards as well in the race director's event notes. So wonder if that was, starting to get into his head as well as a bit of a distraction. I think that particular weekend when we found out, I thought it was a bit of a joke, to be honest. But, we know Hamilton, how he is quite open and, very, his image-wise and everything, he loves his jewelry and stuff. Can't blame him. Yeah, well, whether that was starting to weigh on his mind too. So
Yeah, I'm glad that that's kind of died a bit of a death over the last few weeks, because there was talk about he wouldn't be allowed to race in Monaco because of this jewelry, and it's something that I'm just not really interested in as something. I think when it comes to that kind of thing, yes, you're entitled to do what you want with your body, but it's the rules of the sport. Just take it out or get it removed. Does it really mean that much to you? I can understand it if it was, it may well be, we don't know, but if it was something that was put on his body because of like a reminder of a loved one or something that means something special to him, then I understand that. But from what I understand, it's just a fashion thing. So just get rid of it. I just don't understand what the issue is. You want to play in Formula One, then you got to abide by the rules. So I'm just so over it as a subject, and I won't stand there and defend him. Or if Vettel wants to wear his Gap pants, then I don't care. Just don't wear them. It's not in the rules. But that's not what we're here to discuss. But it certainly is something that may well have weighed on his mind. And if it does, is that really where his focus should be, Tom? Is this kind of part of the reason why he's lost focus this year?
I'm trying not to get into this whole. Into the whole jewelry thing because Jawad's summed it quite well. Like you said, Tom, if he wants to play in F1, he's got to abide by the rules. End story. And Mercedes last year were pushing for all the rules to be enforced, all the rest of it. So this is what it is, and it's not a vendetta; it's a safety thing. But aside from all that, over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, we have sort of seen more and more off-track distractions for Hamilton, and I think he could sort of get away with it in the previous years because he never really had anyone who was going to be really challenging him for the title. I know that there was a bit of an attempt from Ferrari in 2018 and 2019, and the odd race win was under threat from one of the Red Bulls or from one of the Ferraris, or there was the odd driver here or there sort of looking for a race win. But for a long time, it was going to be, right, Hamilton's going to qualify on pole. He's going to get a good start. Bottas is going to drop to the oil and Hamilton's going to sit up front. And it was almost like he had time to think about other things. But last season, obviously, we saw him have to be mentally engaged for the entire season, and I think when the season started last season, you could see that he was like, oh heck, I'm really going to have to battle tooth and nail for this championship, and ultimately it obviously didn't quite happen. So I think the whole jury thing and all that, if that would have happened a few seasons ago, I don't think it would have affected him that much. But now that he's not able to get on top of the car, or doesn't appear to be able to get on top of the car, Mercedes put out that post a few weeks ago. I think it was about a month ago, maybe even longer than that now, where there's a picture of George and Hamilton pouting outside the factory, and Mercedes capturing just something along the lines of, we'll be back soon, or we're working on things, because Hamilton hadn't had very good results by that point. And I kind of thought to myself, and I think a few people on the Slack mentioned it, that it's like, well, hang on a minute, you're ignoring all the good results George has had, because George had already had at least one podium by that point, if not two. I can't remember if this came up before Australia or not. And I kind of thought to myself, you're doing your other driver a bit of a disservice. Just because Hamilton can't get on with the car doesn't mean that it's a whole Mercedes thing. So, and then the whole thing in Spain at the start of the race, when he was saying, "Oh, we should retire the car," he was saying, "Oh, bring in all the rest of it." That's going to be quite demoralising for his team to hear that, their, for want of a better phrase, star driver, their main man, Lewis Hamilton. When you think of F1, you think of big names: Schumacher, Senna, McLaren, Williams, Ferrari. Hamilton, he's one of those names. He's just associated with F1. Even if you don't know F1, you know Lewis Hamilton. He's like Ronaldo or Messi of football. So for them to hear that must have been pretty demoralising. Thinking, we've they've got all the people back at the factory who he's thanked so many times when he won races. To hear that he's sort of just like, oh well, car's a bit dash. Let's retire it. There's no point. I'm not going to get any point. Very sort of negative, very sort of like just sort of like down, and it's like I get where he was coming from, But if you go in with that attitude, with that sort of defeated attitude, it's not going to help anybody else, and it's not going to help your own mental state and your own mental preparations for upcoming races. And how is he going to win another championship if he's thinking, oh, I can't win, I can't do this?
Yeah, I completely get where you're coming from with that. I just think we do need to be very careful with these radio broadcasts, because they do very much follow a narrative, and we don't hear everything, and sometimes we hear things different. The biggest thing that made me really question this narrative that they put out with these radio messages was Abu Dhabi last year, without trying to go over everything as we said already. But the moment when the safety car came out and all you heard was this 5-second long bleep from Lewis Hamilton's radio. And in reality, it was a very calm message to Hamilton. Hamilton said the S word, and then that was it. And I think he said "man" at the end of it. And it's just such a contrived attempt to create this view. And I'm not saying it's a witch hunt against Hamilton, because it isn't. I'm just giving a contrary point. And to your point you made about the demoralisation of the team and retiring the car. Again, I listened back to the first few laps of the race from Hamilton's perspective on the onboard, and yeah, it was difficult to hear him say that from a self admitting Lewis Hamilton fan here. It was difficult to hear him say that, but in the past we've heard him trying to get as much advantage as possible in certain situations, and thinking, given that only a few races earlier he'd spent an entire race in Saudi Arabia trying to get past cars and was not able to do so because the car was so bad, and fearing that he had damage to the car, was it going to be another race where he sits at the back not doing anything, and would that car be better served later in the season having a fresher engine? I think that's him trying to find an advantage, but it's still difficult to hear from that perspective. So I fully understand that as well. I think it's come a bit from the right place and a bit from the wrong place. But as soon as Bono said, nope, we're on for points here, we've got a plan, he said, hey firm, and then got his head down straight away, was setting laps half a second quicker than George Russell for pretty much the rest of the race, and was managing temperatures as well. He was every other lap it was need more lift and coast. So he was obviously battling temperature issues in that car for the whole race as well. So, but I'm sure we'll get onto that. But yes, it's I completely agree in a lot of ways as well. But from the Australian Grand Prix, which was a fairly positive result, we head to, as you've said, was potentially one of his worst moments of the season. Imola qualified 13th, and then with the sprint race, you thought this was a good opportunity for him to move forward in the race. Finished the sprint way back in 14th, and then and the race again only managed to make the one position to finish in 13th. Were there any positives from this weekend?
Couldn't really find any, to be honest. He pretty much lingered in P13 for majority of the race. He was stuck behind Pierre Gasly again, and compared to the way I see it is I compare it to last year where he was a lap down. Of course, he was held back onto the lead lap by the safety car, but was able to just scythe through the field and came back for what could have been an unlikely podium finish at the end. 12 months on or whatever, he is unable to break into the top 10. Yes, he was hurt by Esteban Ocon having an unsafe release in the pits as well when they did the pit stop. But, we've seen Hamilton in the past, even when the Mercedes car has not been the best setup for overtaking, that he can just, make overtaking look easy. It's like he's playing the F1 game with like 0% difficulty on the AI. He just manages to get from the back to the front, but he just couldn't do it. He couldn't pass an AlphaTauri in this situation and ended up finishing the race a lap down. It didn't help either that there was a lot being said about Mercedes this weekend as well, about, is it time to hit the panic button? Are they going to, write off this season and look to focus their development on next season? Because obviously it's difficult now for these bigger teams who are used to spending money and development resources to get themselves out of these situations. But with the budget cap and then also the limitation on CFD and wind tunnel testing time and whatnot, they can't just have these quick fixes there. They've got to be smart about it. So, and then for that footage to also emerge of Hamilton and Toto Wolff in the garage after qualifying, looking like that they're very animated and having a go at each other. That's another thing, when you're talking about the broadcast kind of weaving this narrative, it kind of just exacerbated the situation a little bit. And we also heard Hamilton compare this season to 2009 as well, which is probably the worst season he's had other than this season in his entire career. But even when you look at that 2009 season, he was still able to win a race. He was, doing a semi-decent job in what was otherwise a pretty terrible car. So to me, this, for it to be worse than that is for him to not be able to win, which I still will talk about later, I'm sure. I feel like, it's still possible. But yeah, overall, as a whole weekend, this was definitely the worst. And then when you look at his teammates' performance, like we've been talking about throughout this show, George, he qualified outside the top 10 and was able to make his way to P4. So, in the same car, mind you. So how can he pull off those overtakes and side through the field when, 7-time world champion is unable to, despite 12 months ago being able to in the old Mercedes?
Tom, your thoughts on that? Are you of a similar vein to Jawad, or have you got a contrasting view?
No, I largely agree with what Jawad said, to be honest. And for a man who normally chats an awful lot on this podcast, I don't have an awful lot to add to that.
Stop the presses, Tom's we finally stumped him.
You've broken me. It's just I think Jawad, you summed it up perfectly about being able to. Last year he was able to side through the field, and this year he just can't get there. Maybe it's good for F1 that we're having a change of the guard at the top, because I think a lot of people felt a bit like this in 2013 going into 2014 when Vettel had those 4 pretty damn dominant years. I mean, 2012, yeah, okay, not as much, but he won 4 titles on the bounce. And maybe it's good for F1 to have a shake-up and have another team at the top, and and that's the thing. When you get to the top, there's only one way to go, and that's down. So, maybe somebody for driver and team.
Yeah, I mean, to quote the Oracle, everything that has a beginning has an end. And certainly the end will come for Mercedes and Hamilton at some point. It's just, is it now? Is it a year's time? Is it 5 years' time? Who knows? I mean, we see how long Alonso's going on for. So it could well be that he is still here in his 40s when he said he would never be racing into his 40s. But it just depends where the motivation comes from, I suppose. But from what was widely believed to be his low point of the season, we head to Miami, and Mercedes finally starts to trickle in a couple of updates, not as much as they expected to for cost cap reasons and trying to make sure they did the right thing, but the car definitely seemed to be better. It actually topped a practice session with George Russell and seemed to get on top of the car. Hamilton certainly looking strong, but once again behind George at the flag. Improvement or a bit of a false dawn, do you think, guys?
I would say sorry, go on,
Jawad. Probably a bit of a false dawn in my eyes. He qualified ahead of George, but then in the race ended up behind him again with a safety car. It's becoming a bit comical. But also they were able to.
Bird Myland that just doesn't like him.
He wants to be the top Mercedes driver this year. Does Burt Mylander? Yeah, also getting that extra place because of his old teammate Valtteri Bottas making the error on the restart. I think that kind of helped their cause in a little bit. So, yeah, it's a points paying finish. That's all I can say about Miami for them, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, I also think Miami was a bit of a false dawn, and I also think that much like when people were saying that Hamilton's back and Mercedes are back and all the rest of it, it's like, no, they've made some improvements, and Miami was a bit of an equalizer because teams didn't have any previous data from running there, so they didn't know how well they were or were not going to go. So it's Miami was obviously an improvement, but it still doesn't take away from the fundamental issues that are going on at Mercedes at the moment, and the fundamental issues that Hamilton is having. I honestly don't think Hamilton's gonna is gonna have a really good result this year. I really don't. And I think if it was going to come anyway, it would have come in Spain. And the recent run of races, I think, is just proved, has effectively proved my point.
Yeah, I was certainly looking at, as I'm sure when we get to Monaco, we'll discuss the crazy races and lucking into a good result, but or certainly lucking, but getting that that little spark of something to grab onto, and how it hasn't really happened yet. I do think that Miami was a definite positive for Mercedes, but still qualifying 8/10 of a second off Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, it certainly wasn't a Mercedes are back when they're nearly a second off the pace. It's just more a case of that they were clearly the third best team. I think, he seemed to have the measure of George Russell all weekend, but through luck or judgment or however you want to judge it, still ended up behind him at the flag, and it just keeps happening. And as you say, you make your own luck in Formula One, and he doesn't. He's certainly not getting that luck. Whereas in past years he potentially has had that. Not saying that his championships are lucky, because if you change one result in one race in 3 seasons, then he's a 10-time world champion. So it's you can look at it 2 ways. Yes, he's been lucky at times, but other times he's definitely been very unlucky. And weirdly, he doesn't tend to win on finales that are to be decided on that day. It's only really 2008, 2014 when he's really taken the championship during a finale. In 2014, although he was winning the race, Rosberg did have technical issues as well. So it's very much bouncing backwards and forwards for Hamilton. It's difficult to see where it's going to come from, where it's going to change around. But I'm the one myself who's now lost for words, Tom, because I've kind of ran out of things to say on this subject. I'm just completely confused by the whole situation, to be honest. It's not really where I expected Mercedes to be this year.
No, I don't think any of us expected Mercedes to be where they are. I think it's one of those ones where we knew there was going to be a change at the top, there was going to be a changing at the guard. But I think a lot of people still expected Mercedes to be there or thereabouts, or certainly running close. But no, they're not anywhere. And in some ways, it's a shame, obviously, but because you never really want to see anyone doing badly, unless they're Mazepin. So seeing him getting burnt out of F1 was hilarious. But just for the record, I'm not sitting here saying, "Oh, Hamilton's not in the top car. I love Max." I'm not sitting here doing that at all. Far from it.
Not out loud, anyway.
So what I do when we stop recording is a different story. No. It's not so much a fall from grace, and I just don't want it to turn into a Sebastian Vettel situation where he sort of loiters around F1 for a while, somewhat clinging onto his past success. Maybe he should quit whilst he's still somewhat ahead.
I think it'll be difficult for him to quit now, given how the season's gone. I think he would definitely want to have another reprieve, at least a shot at a championship before he retired. He's got another year on his contract. Maybe if the car is nowhere next year, then maybe he thinks that that's enough. Part of me thinks he'll retire at the end of next season anyway. But we'll look at the Spanish Grand Prix. It was only one position higher finish than Miami, but a completely different race in some ways. Some people say it's the performance of the season. Is that accurate, or is it just wishful thinking, guys?
Definitely, like we said earlier, performance of the season. I think, had he not had that first lap incident with Kevin Magnussen there at turn 4, what could the race have looked like for him? Certainly he had the race pace akin to the front runners. He had to give up P4 because the car was overheating, and just had to cool it down towards the end of the race and still come home with P5. But you'd expect that. You'd expect a good result from Hamilton around a circuit that he had won the last 5 Grand Prix in a row there, and he's been, everyone tests there every year and they have lots of experience, and especially someone like Hamilton will have more experience than others on the grid at that particular circuit. So you would have expected that he would at least have the upper hand over his teammate at that track. But it was good. It was good to see him come through the field. It's what we would have liked to have seen at Imola, for example, but it didn't happen. But it's kind of, keeps going up and down, up and down. You know, one race is good, one race is not. So, you know, are they at a stage where they have to kind of just set their expectation for the season and say, look, you know, if we target this every race, then at least we can't be too disappointed. You know, I don't know what their internal targets are, or if they're thinking that, you know, we're going to find the silver bullet every weekend and we'll be back up there or whatever. Like they're comfortably in third in the championship. So why not just, you know, continue to protect that? You know, if Ferrari have some kind of catastrophic end to the season, then sure, they can catch up and finish second. I wouldn't put it past Ferrari to implode that way, to be honest, because that's what they do. But I wrote after Imola about Mercedes in general, saying that it looks bad from the outside, but there's no need to push the panic button yet, because they have the team and the culture in that team that knows, you know, how to win, and they've been winning for a very long time. They've had people leave, but, you know, there's always someone who steps up. You know, everyone thought after Paddy Lowe left that, oh, you know, that's it, you know, is this the end or whatever? And in comes James Allison, and then they only got better. And even when Andy Cowell left from Brixworth, from the engine program, you know, they thought that would be it too. Sure, it's, you know, kind of ties in with what's happened this season so far, but I feel like, you know, they're still up there. You know, they still are competitive, so it's not looking too bad for them. So they have the team and the culture to rebound. It's about what kind of expectations they set. You know, Mercedes as a team will have to think about, you know, their long term, as opposed to, oh, you know, can we deliver Hamilton an 8th title? Which, you know, I'm sure they would love to. Toto Wolff would love to as well. But, you know, Hamilton will have to see as well that, you know, if he truly loves this team and wants to, you know, see the best for his team, is how can I contribute to ensuring that you guys are going to be successful in the long term? You know, imagine leaving it in a rabble, for example, you know, and then Mercedes kind of fade into obscurity, and that's the end of it, you know. Like we said earlier too, you don't want to see him in a situation where he ends up like Sebastian Vettel, who we're positive he's never going to win a championship again. But just the last few years, it's very mediocre what's going on at Aston Martin. I look at other motorsport icons, you know, likes of Valentino Rossi, his final few seasons in MotoGP, and this is still the rider that is associated with being the greatest of all time, yet it was absolute, you know, disgraceful the last couple of seasons that he was riding on the bike. I do not want to see someone like Lewis Hamilton. Like, I'm not a big fanboy or, you know, I'll, you know, buy all his merchandise and, you know, Team LH or whatever, but I respect him enough not to want to see him kind of have that end to his career like, you know, some world-class athletes do, where they just, you know, keep trying, and it's embarrassing.
Yeah. As someone who's followed Lewis Hamilton's career since he first signed that McLaren contract way back when he was, 12, 13 or whatever it was, it's as I said earlier, it's going to come to an end at some point, and I think that he's certainly coming to an end sooner rather than later. But on the back of the Spain result, though, I was really positive, and I could genuinely see Mercedes challenging Ferrari for second in the championship, just because that they just are nowhere near as operationally sharp as Red Bull. And you look at the seasons where Ferrari had a car that looked like they could have challenged Hamilton for the championship. You just get the feeling that if that had been Max Verstappen and that had been Red Bull, then they would have potentially got a couple of championships under the belt. Even if you saw, you know, Lewis Hamilton in that Ferrari team, you think that maybe he would have got it over the line, given that he would have kind of driven the team in that direction and got the team over the line. And I just think that Ferrari as a whole, certainly when they had Vettel there, are just not operationally sharp enough to win a championship at the moment. So I think it's very much Red Bull's to lose this season. It's just a case, is that going to buoy Hamilton on to be chasing after Ferrari for second for the team, even if George Russell is way ahead in the championship? Is he going to be fighting is he going to be like motivated enough to try and do that for the team and play the team game, or are we writing him off for passing George Russell too soon? What do you think, Tom?
I think Hamilton's going to have to play the team game, because F1 is ultimately a team sport. And yes, I know we have a World Drivers' Championship, of which he has received 7, obviously. He's not going to get an 8th this year, barring some sort of weird glitch in the matrix or some, if Red Bull and Mercedes, if Red Bull and Ferrari pack up and leave, which I don't think will happen, let's be fair, no matter how many times they threaten it. I think maybe Hamilton's realised that he's got a teammate within this year who is not just going to be a rear gunner, going to be a yes man, going to be a I'll let Lewis by or all the rest of it. I think this is the first time since when Rosberg was there that he's had a teammate who can really challenge him, who is giving him a run for his money and then some in qualifying, in race results, in strategy, in pace, in everything. Because let's be fair, Bottas never really had to measure Hamilton. He did on the odd weekend. He had some weekends or some qualities or some races where he was quicker and he was good. But Russell is different gravy. He's been a member of the Mercedes Driver Academy, and Mercedes have let a few people go from that academy. People like Pascal Wehrlein, Esteban Ocon, Stoffel Van Dorn. I don't think he's in anymore. And it's like they've kept Russell. They kept him warm in F1 for 3 years. They gave him that drive in Sakir 2020. And it's like maybe Hamilton's realised that he's up against something different in George Russell. He's not going to be able to say, "Oh, come on, George, out the way. I want to come through." I think he's realised that it's going to be a case of, "Oh, heck, I've actually got to fight on track for him, or I've got to try and do him in strategy or whatever." And yes, he's not going to catch Russell in the championship, pending some freak results or something. I really don't think that's going to happen. So this year, I think he's got to settle for the team player role, for coming home in 6th, 7th, 8th, or wherever. His season this year, or for the rest of this year, is about getting what's best for the team, and that's making sure that they're keeping tabs on Ferrari. Because we all know Ferrari, they're going to pull another Monaco in a few races, and they're going to cost themselves a load of points. And if Mercedes can keep on top of that, they can just keep squeezing that gap. They can just keep tabs on them, and then there's a possibility they may nick second in the constructors if Ferrari go full Ferrari. On the flip side, who's fourth at the minute? It's McLaren, I think, isn't it? But
the moment before.
Yeah. But I was looking at it, and McLaren haven't even got 100 points, I don't think, or they might have just ticked over now as of Monaco. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly certain there was a pretty significant points difference between them and Mercedes.
McLaren have 59 points.
There we go. Mercedes, 130 odd, I think?
134 to Ferrari's 199.
Exactly, yeah. So they're more likely to catch Ferrari than they are to lose to McLaren behind them.
Yeah,
so
especially to have a quicker car as well.
Exactly, yeah. That needs to be their focus, and that's what Hamilton's focus needs to be. I know it's not what he's used to from the best part of a decade, but times are changing, and it's what it is.
Yeah, I think the one positive that Hamilton has got on his side, we're a third of the way through the season, and obviously he's 34 points behind his teammate, which is a massive gap when you're fighting for 5th and 6th place. If you're fighting for wins, you can turn that over in 2 races. But if Mercedes do get that car together, he's got 2/3 of the season to chip away at that lead. If that car is getting podiums, he'll erode that gap in a couple of races. But if it stays in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th positions, then it's going to take him a long time to catch George, because he's not going to beat him every race. I do think he can still, over the course of the season, beat George Russell. George Russell's going to have a down patch at some point this season. He's going to have a couple of bad races. At the moment, everything's fallen his way, and he is obviously driving incredibly well as well. He's got to grips with that car very quickly. But I do think that there's going to be a time when Hamilton is going to get his lion's share of the luck, and he is going to start to reel George in. Whether he's got a huge head start now, George. Can he hold on? I think he can. Whether he will, I'm not sure. It very much depends on Mercedes' performance. If Mercedes sack off the season and say that's it, we'll try next season, I think that's the final nail in the coffin for Hamilton versus his teammate. But if they push ahead and are able to challenge for podiums on a regular basis, then potentially it might go the other way. It may mean that Russell finishes even further ahead, but it just means if there's more points on offer, there's more chance to catch. After the huge positivity of the Spanish Grand Prix weekend, we headed into Monaco last weekend, and high hopes for Mercedes actually challenging for something better than than what they have been pushing for. But an 8th place in qualifying and an 8th place race finish, changeable conditions, you'd have thought would have really favoured Hamilton for a better result than where he started. But it just wasn't to be, was it, this weekend?
No, and it seemed like the issues that they thought that they fixed with the upgrades in Barcelona, chiefly the porpoising, actually resurfaced. So it begs you to ask the question whether the upgrades that they bought, was it, more like a Band-Aid for those problems on specific circuits, and then at other circuits, low speed corners and whatnot, they're still suffering with this issue. So it seemed again that Hamilton was more hurt by it than his teammate was. So that, explained the deficit there in qualifying. And then we all know Monaco, basically where you qualify is kind of where you're going to finish. And, the fact that he was one of the advocates of, in future races, possibly, making mandatory two pit stops or whatever, or making some track changes to allow more overtaking. He's seen over the past 2 seasons what it feels like to race at Monaco in the kind of midfield where not much really happens during the race. But he was caught in that battle with Esteban Ocon there at turn 1. Ocon coming off worse, I guess, with the penalty, and then basically getting stuck behind the Fernando Alonso train for the rest of the race. And the way Alonso slowed the rest of the race down for anyone behind him basically hurt Hamilton's chances of possibly finishing ahead. So, again, just the car problems, still can't get on top of that, which is difficult. And then, just bad circumstances with getting stuck behind slower drivers in the race.
Yeah, anything to add on that, Tom? I just completely agree with everything you've said there, to be honest.
Not really. Again, Jawad just sums it up pretty nicely. It was how many times have we seen Hamilton do well in the wet, and he's put in some of the absolute worldy wet weather drives that we've seen over the years. I know Monaco is obviously a different circuit to do it around, don't get me wrong, but how many times have we seen Hamilton pull some absolute master strokes in the wet? I asked not the other day what you think the best wet weather drives are, and Hamilton came up an awful lot. So it was. You would have thought if anybody could have done something in the wet at that point, it would have been him. But alas, it was not to be. For everything that went on in that race, for him to finish where he started, given the changeable conditions, given the pit stop gambles, all the rest of it, it was one of those ones where, if he'd have made up places, either through switching straight to slicks at the right time, or switching to inters and then sort of wearing them right down, especially gambling on, especially if he would have gambled on a safety car, so he would have stayed on those inters that would have worn down, and then put a fresh set of tires on in the red flag. That's the kind of thing where we would have said, "Oh, that's a vintage Hamilton performance," but I didn't see any of that. I mean, granted, we didn't see much of him anyway, because Monaco TV direction leaves a lot to be desired, to say the least. But yeah, it was like of all the races where he could have, would have, should have done something, nothing happened, and he didn't make up any ground.
Yeah, I think the team potentially could have been a bit more nimble with what they were looking at doing, and that to be said, Hamilton. So in those conditions, you'd expect Hamilton to be pushing for different decisions and just to try something different to get him out there in free air. And certainly, if the race had have started when it was supposed to start with the initial delay, he was starting on intermediates. He was the highest driver starting on intermediates. So we could well have seen him in a position where he was leading the race before inevitable red flag, when the heavens opened horrendously on what would have been about lap 3, and it could have been a completely different race. It could have been a red flag there, strap on the wets, go on to the end of the race, and then all of a sudden we're looking at a Lewis Hamilton win in Monaco. And these are the fine margins that we're seeing. But this was the one weekend, Monaco, where George Russell just seemed to absolutely just have something over Lewis Hamilton. It's the first time I've seen it. There's always been reasons behind it, or potentially excuses as to why Hamilton hasn't been on a par with Russell, but this was the first weekend for me where Russell arrived and said, I am every bit as good as Lewis Hamilton. And it's certainly, after a little bit of positivity following Spain, it's put us in this position where we've got to ask the question. So based on that, I'm going to ask both of you 3 questions, and I just want a yes or no answer, and then we can go into a bit more detail after that. So the first question to ask to you both, Jawad, ask you first. Will Hamilton win a race this year?
Yes.
Tom?
No.
Wow. Okay. Split panel. Will he beat his teammate this year, Jawad?
No.
And Tom?
No.
And will he ever win another title, Jawad?
No.
And Tom?
Sadly.
No.
So it's pretty damning panel then. There's I'm definitely in agreement, you guys. I for one think he will win a race this year. I don't think he'll beat his teammate, and I'm so on the fence about the title, but I've said myself, have to give a yes or no, so I'm going to go with no as well on that one, and it really pains me to say that. But just to go into a bit more detail on that, then any kind of closing thoughts on Hamilton and the season? Start with you, Jawad. Anything else you want to add, or any reasons, or anything to kind of just
look, I still think, he has that competitive nature in him to still be able to win races and, add to that immaculate record of wins that he's got. The only driver who's reached a century of wins and in pole positions as well. And I don't think that's going to be a record that's going to get touched for a while yet. So, you can feel safe in that respect. But I feel like with all these new young drivers that we're seeing spearheading these teams, such as Ferrari and Red Bull, McLaren, if they can get their act together as well over the coming years with Lando, it almost makes someone like Hamilton look like a dinosaur. I don't feel like he's going to do a Nigel Mansell. I don't think he can do a Nigel Mansell in this era and come back and win a title at the age he did in 92. So it's that whole thing I was saying earlier about, this is a team that has given him a lot, and he's given a lot to as well in terms of success. How does he protect that for the future? And that's what I mean about, helping him set up for future seasons and kind of put his teammate George Russell in a position where he can be the next spearhead, kind of pass that baton on, rather than being a salty hermit and be like, nah, I'm done, that's me out, and then not have anything to do with it. So I don't think Hamilton is that kind of person. We see the impact that he has off track as well on the sport and outside of it with his diversity and equality push as well. So there's a lot for Hamilton to still achieve. And for me, winning another title is not going to, change what I think of him. It's not going to make him any better in my eyes, because I already have such high respect for him. It's not going to also make him any lower. I mean, it will make all those Schumacher fans pretty happy that, that record has not been broken at least. But, he's still going to be one of the greatest drivers of all time. So that's where I'm going to end that one on, I think.
Yeah, in my mind, Hamilton already has more legitimate championships than Schumacher, but that's a whole debate for a different day. Tom, your closing thoughts on Hamilton?
Right, listen, Lewis Hamilton is one of the best drivers this sport has ever seen. There is no questioning that. Yes, he has quite often had good machinery underneath him, but so have other drivers who have failed to do what he has done with the cars they've got. It took Nico Rosberg 3 seasons to beat him, and Nico retired off the back of it because he was so mentally done. Bottas couldn't get near him in 4 or 5 seasons. He wiped the floor with Heikki Kovalainen in 2008. Because after Heikki won a race, his race engineer said, "Welcome to the world of winning, Heikki, many more to come." Lol, no hun. 2009, with absolute dog of a McLaren, he still won. He should have won in 2007, but team strategy somewhat cost him when he pulled into the pits, because they should have pitted him for those tyres, and he went off into the gravel. His engine blew up in Malaysia in 2016, somewhat cost him the title that year. But 2016, Rosberg was in him up there. Hamilton has beaten more records and set more records than I've had hot dinners. And I've had a lot of hot dinners. Look at me. He's he's the only driver to have won over essentially a races, like Jawad said. He's the only driver to have set more than 100 pole position laps. He set more pole positions for Mercedes than Schumacher did in Schumacher's entire career. Now, I know we have more races this season now, but we haven't always. It's only in the last sort of, 5-6 years that we started going out to sort of like 18, 19, 20 races a season. Let's not forget 2020 was a 16, 17 race season, thanks COVID. So yes, the stats may be somewhat artificially inflated by that, but it also says that he was able to hold that mentality and to keep going for such a level for such a time. Hamilton has done so much for the sport in terms of his racing. He's brought people into the sport. He's brought so many sponsors into the sport, and he's just become a big name in the sport. A lot of people like to hate him, and I can see why people don't like him. I'm not particularly fond of him, but you cannot take away just how good a driver he is. He still is. And he set records which I don't think will be broken for a long time.
Yeah, I completely agree, and in a lot of ways, not of everything, but in a lot of ways, I agree with you. And I know it's probably pained you to be so positive about the man on this episode, Tom. So I appreciate it.
No, seriously, not at all. And like I said, when I said I would do this one, is everything I've said today, I wholeheartedly mean, and I stand by. Yes, I'm not a Hamilton fan. We know that. I find him quite grating, but that does not distract from how good a driver he is and the incredible, unrivaled success he has achieved in motorsport for such a long time.
So, I mean, our panelists are in agreement, and as Tom said, it's everyone has their opinion. So, we'd love to hear what you think. And the beauty of global sports is that everyone has an opinion, and yours is no less valid than ours. So, drop us a comment if you agree or disagree with us, and why. We love reading your comments, but just please keep them respectful. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, and we love to hear from it. That is it for us for today. So, you can follow us at F1 Chronicle, and I'm at Tom Horrox F1 if you want to follow me. Jawad, tell us more about Hit the Apex podcast.
Yep. So you can follow my podcast on Twitter at Hit the Apex Media. It's available on all good podcast platforms such as iTunes, Spotify, Google, and on YouTube as well. So do check it out. I've got to have my Monaco episode up hopefully either tomorrow or Friday. So yeah, check it out.
And Tom, where can people hear more from you?
So if you really want to hear more of me, that's brave of you, but I'm part of everythingf1.com. So there's obviously that aforementioned domain. We have the Everything F1 podcast, which goes out on Wednesday. So one came out today, actually. It was a Monaco review that some of my colleagues did. Also, we have our social platforms. So we have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. We have a Discord server. We have TikTok, because apparently that's the thing. Not that you'll find me on any of those.
Do you not do any dances on it or anything?
No, but someone did actually do it in front of my car, so I beeped the horn at them and they dropped their phone, which is quite amusing. Which is a very, very, very me thing to do.
Oh, so evil.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm completely evil. Get off my bonnet then. It's not your car. Yeah, no, you can find us across all our social platforms. The handle is either at join EF1 or just at Everything F1. If you search Everything F1, you'll find us. Yes, I think that's everything. You can find our podcast on basically all your favorite podcasting platforms. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Cast, which I use myself, Amazon, Carrier Pigeon, our websites, pretty much any way you can think of.
Fantastic. Well, today has been really great fun, even if it does feel like a bit of the beginning of the end of a wonderful career for one of my favourite drivers of all time. Not my favourite, that's always going to be Ayrton Senna, but Lewis certainly up there with that. Thank you very much to our audience for listening to us and watching us on YouTube as well. We will be back this weekend, Saturday, I believe, with our preview of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Baku. So we look forward to seeing you then. Goodbye.